What if the monster under your bed, but was inside your head? A decade ago, the Babadook crawled out of just 2 theaters to become a horror revolution. Not with jump scares, but by exposing a truth more terrifying. Grief can be a monster too. This isn't just a film about a pop-up book demon, it's about single mother Amelia, whose unprocessed trauma literally takes shape as the Babadook. The more she ignores her pain, the stronger it grows. Director Jennifer Kent crafted a nightmare that changed horror forever, birthing the elevated horror movement. It's genius. The monster never leaves because some demons aren't meant to be killed, just fed. You can't get rid of the Babadook, but can you survive what it forces you to confront? The Babadook premiered a decade ago. It arrived quietly, playing in a mere 2 theaters and featuring a relatively unknown Australian filmmaker, Jennifer Kent. Yet this unassuming independent film unexpectedly blossomed into a significant cultural phenomenon and a pivotal milestone in the horror genre. Its journey from a limited release to a widespread sensation underscores its unique resonance, which was not immediately apparent to mainstream audiences, but deepened profoundly over time. This trajectory suggests that the film's horror is not rooted in immediate, overt scares designed for opening weekend box office success, but rather in a subtle, psychological depth that demands reflection and allows its themes to permeate cultural consciousness. This aligns with the burgeoning, elevated horror movement, a subgenre characterized by its thematic richness and artistic merit. Often gaining traction through critical acclaim and word of mouth rather than initial commercial blockbusters, the film garnered widespread critical praise, specifically lauded for its compelling cast performances, unique creature design, intriguing premise, and profound thematic depth. Its critical success was further cemented by numerous accolades, including winning Best Film, Best Direction, and Best Original Screenplay at the 4th AACTA Awards, as well as Best Horror at the 20th Empire Awards and Best First Feature at the New York Film Critics Circle Awards. In the years following its release, The Babadook cemented its status as a cult classic and is now widely regarded as a modern horror masterpiece. Beyond its individual triumph, the film is recognized for having kicked off a wave of challenging filmmaker-driven genre movies that followed its introspective approach, influencing titles such as It Follows, Get Out, and Hereditary. Its lasting cultural footprint is evident even in its direct reference in Scream 2022, where it is cited as a favorite among a new generation of horror enthusiasts, solidifying its place in the horror canon. This video will deep dive into the Babadook. Profound terror stems that from its origins as a manifestation of psychological trauma, amplified by masterful cinematic techniques that tap into universal human fears. The film is renowned for its nuanced portrayal of psychological horror and the intricate complexities of grief. The Babadook entity itself functions as a potent metaphor for psychological turmoil, repressed emotions, and the tangible manifestation of grief. With its horror elements fundamentally rooted in the dangers of emotional suppression, a significant aspect of its terror lies in what remains unseen. The film strategically implies rather than explicitly shows, compelling the viewer's imagination to fill in the terrifying gaps. This approach allows the Babadook to burrow deep into the audience's psyche, triggering profound thoughts about personal vulnerability, existential dread, and the inherent fragility of the human mind. The genesis of the monster. Jennifer Kent's vision, the origins of the Babadook, are deeply personal and intrinsically linked to the artistic vision of its creator. The director has revealed that the film's core horror elements and thematic depth were profoundly influenced by the death of her own father, directly connecting the Babadook's terror to the universal experience of suppressed emotions and unresolved grief. The Babadook, its unique power and authenticity. Unlike many commercial horror films that rely on external scares, the Babadook's terror resonates because it taps into a universal yet deeply personal human experience of psychological pain. This direct link between the filmmaker's lived experience and the monster's symbolic meaning elevates the film, making its horror feel more visceral and relatable, and thus more terrifying. This commitment to emotional truth is why Kent maintained an unwavering dedication to her artistic vision, describing the film as very pure and fighting adamantly to keep it uncompromising despite its low budget and external pressures to alter the ending or produce a sequel. Interestingly, Kent rarely revisits the film, even describing watching it again as my idea of a nightmare. This reluctance may stem from the deeply personal nature of its themes and her desire not to be solely defined by a single work, as evidenced by her subsequent equally challenging film. The Nightingale. The Babadook, as a symbolic entity, is explicitly stated by Kent to be intrinsically linked to the protagonist. Amelia. Everything started with her Amelia. Every element of that entity or energy, is based on what she's suppressed. This establishes the Babadook not as an external malevolent force, but as a direct manifestation of Amelia's unaddressed grief and inner turmoil. While primarily Amelia's psychological monster, Kent emphasizes that the Babadook is also a co-creation of both mother and son, emerging from their unique dynamic. She asserts, take one of them out of the picture and this thing couldn't have come to life. The inclusion of Sam, the son, is vital. It underscores the film's message that suppressing emotions not only harms oneself but also inflicts pain upon those closest to them. Subtle visual cues within the film, such as ink and charcoal smudges on Amelia's hands, subtly suggest that her subconscious, drawing upon her past as a children's book author, was the true creator of the Mr. Babadook pop-up book, serving as a desperate, unacknowledged outlet for her buried trauma. Kent's artistic influences for the Babadook's design extend to early silent horror films and silent cinema in general, which she admired for their beautiful handmade nature, theatricality, and extraordinary quality. She specifically cites Georges Méliès as a significant inspiration. This choice is not merely stylistic. It is deeply intertwined with the Babadook's psychological function, making it feel both archaic and intimately personal. Kent was resolute in her decision to use handmade-looking special effects for the Babadook, aiming for a visual style that directly mirrored the pop-up book from which the creature originates. She proudly notes that everything is in camera with only minimal post-production refinement, ensuring the world of the film reflected the handmade nature of the book. The Babadook's physical appearance also incorporates elements of Kent's personal phobias, notably her strong dislike for large Australian cockroaches, especially their unexpected flight. The Babadook's design is layered. The top layer is the strange-looking male figure depicted in the book, which Kent describes as something quite evil as playing at being human. Beneath this, there is a nebulous and far more sinister essence. The creature's jerky and cartoonish movements, reminiscent of a pop-up book, further contribute to its unsettling and unnatural presence. By making the monster feel as though it literally stepped out of a child's book, a product of imagination and nascent fears, and drawing on early cinematic techniques that prioritized psychological suggestion over explicit gore, Kent grounds the Babadook not in external reality, but in the realm of the mind. This makes it terrifying precisely because it feels like a manifestation of internal anxieties and repressed childhood fears. Rather than a tangible threat, cinematic roots are archaic, yet its manifestation is intimately personal. The psychological abyss. Babadook as a metaphor for inner turmoil at its core. The Babadook functions as a potent allegory for the profound psychological turmoil experienced by its protagonist, Amelia. The film is widely interpreted as a powerful representation of her unresolved grief, pervasive depression, and the repressed trauma stemming from the tragic death of her husband, Oscar, who perished in a car crash while transporting her to the hospital during labor. Amelia's struggle to cope with this unplanned reality and the painful memories intensifies, particularly as Samuel's birthday, which tragically coincides with the anniversary of Oscar's death, approaches. Her initial coping mechanism involves attempting to move on by consciously pushing the tragic event out of her mind, avoiding discussions about Oscar and locking away all of his possessions in the basement. However, the film powerfully illustrates that this very act of suppression paradoxically strengthens the Babadook. The more Amelia attempts to ignore her grief, the more potent and malevolent the Babadook becomes, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of dread. This highlights a core psychological principle. What is denied often gains strength, festering and finding destructive outlets. The film's central message underscores the critical importance of acknowledging and valuing grief and other negative emotions, rather than attempting to entirely suppress them as a necessary step towards genuine emotional progress. Beyond individual grief, The Babadook delves into the darker, often unacknowledged aspects of motherhood, loss, and how mental illness can, in itself, manifest as monstrous entities. Vividly portrays the immense exhaustion and unique challenges faced by mothers, especially single parents who are navigating profound loss. Amelia's pervasive depression resonates deeply with real-world experiences of postpartum depression and other forms of mental health struggles. Under the Babadook's malevolent influence, Amelia's underlying anger and resentment towards her son, Sam, accelerate and manifest as vitriolic and vengeful behavior, fueled by the monster's parasitic presence. This illustrates how suppressed emotions can turn both inward and outward, severely damaging interpersonal relationships. The monster's insidious goal is to isolate Amelia from the world and convince her that resistance is futile, a common and terrifying experience for individuals battling mental illness. The film's psychological depth is further illuminated through the application of psychoanalytic frameworks, particularly Jeffrey Jerome Cohen's monster theory and Freudian concepts of the ID, ego, and superego. According to monster theory, the Babadook functions as a cultural symbol reflecting societal fears, anxieties, and taboos. Its mysterious emergence from a children's storybook and into Amelia's life symbolizes the overwhelming overflow of her repressed feelings into her conscious mind. Consistent with the idea that monsters represent the deepest, most distressed aspects of human experience, the Babadook forces Amelia to confront her long-ignored grief, thereby symbolizing her profound fears and psychological turmoil that she has actively avoided. Furthermore, the monster's invasion of Amelia's home, traditionally a sanctuary, vividly symbolizes how her pervasive sadness and trauma disrupt her daily life and severely impair her ability to function effectively as a mother. Despite Amelia's desperate attempts to destroy the book, the Babadook's persistent reappearance graphically depicts the enduring nature of trauma, emphasizing that such deep-seated psychological issues cannot be simply wished away, but demand recognition and active resistance. From a Freudian perspective, the Babadook is interpreted as a direct manifestation of Amelia's ID, representing her raw, unfiltered, instinctual desires and fears, including her overwhelming grief, anger, guilt, and subconscious frustrations directed towards her son, Samuel. Her fear and anxiety, central to her primal instincts, arise uncontrollably as her ID dictates the expression of these repressed feelings. Amelia's ego constantly attempts to mediate between the insistent demands of her ID and the harsh reality of societal expectations, particularly her duties as a mother. Her ego employs various survival mechanisms, such as trying to forget the book, denying the severity of her psychological disorder, and displacing her anger onto Sam. Meanwhile, Amelia's superego is heavily influenced by her pervasive guilt over her husband's death and her profound sense of perceived failure as a mother. This leads to intense inner conflicts with her ID, exacerbating her already precarious psychological state. Her superego relentlessly blames her for her anger at Sam and her attempts to avoid the painful reality of her husband's death, thereby increasing her guilt. The film's climax, where Amelia directly confronts the Babadook, powerfully symbolizes the ego's strenuous effort to control her deeply repressed feelings. By finally acknowledging the Babadook's existence, Amelia's ego begins to manage the profound conflict between her ID and superego. The film's nuanced ending, where Amelia confines the Babadook to the basement and periodically feeds it, illustrates the ego's acceptance of the ID's persistent presence. This signifies that traumatic feelings are an inherent part of her psyche and must be managed and integrated rather than completely destroyed. This radical departure from traditional horror tropes, which typically conclude with the monster's complete destruction, proposes a deeply realistic approach to living with trauma and mental illness. It suggests that true healing isn't about making pain disappear, but about acknowledging its presence, understanding its needs, and controlling its influence so it doesn't consume one's life. This redefines victory not as triumph over an external foe, but as an ongoing internal negotiation and acceptance. Now, this innovative resolution is a key reason why the film is hailed as a modern horror masterpiece and a significant influence on elevated horror, as it pushes the genre beyond simple scares into complex psychological territory. The house where the majority of the film's action unfolds is depicted as alive, serving as a direct reflection, an extension of Amelia's internal state. It transforms into a mental space where past traumas have to be resolved. The home's oppressive atmosphere is visually reinforced by walls painted dark blue or institutional gray, with closed windows, creating the impression of a confining bubble of darkness and despair, rather than a nurturing environment. The Babadook's invasion of this traditionally safe sanctuary powerfully symbolizes how sadness and trauma can permeate and disrupt every aspect of daily life. Babadook's influence extends far beyond its individual narrative, cementing its role in ushering in a new wave of elevated or introspective horror cinema. The film was at the nexus of the elevated horror term, a genre that prioritizes thematic depth and psychological resonance over conventional scares. It is widely credited with helping to kick off a wave of challenging filmmaker-driven genre movies like It Follows, Get Out, and Hereditary. This trend, where tangible monsters represent internal psychological struggles, has continued to flourish, encompassing films like Saint Maud, Swallow, Daniel Isn't Real, The Night House, and Mike Flanagan's works for Netflix. The sustained success of more recent titles such as Smile and M3 Gan further suggests that this introspective horror trend is still growing and evolving. Beyond its genre-shaping impact, The Babadook achieved unexpected cultural resonance, notably its embrace as a queer icon. Jennifer Kent herself found Mr. Babadook's sudden status as a queer icon surprising, but incredibly positive. The creature's faceless showmanship and bombastic, campy attacks have been cited as reasons for this peculiar reappropriation, an identity that at first appears incongruous with his sinister demeanor, but in fact oddly captures the bombastic, campy attacks he performs for the family. This unexpected embrace demonstrates how complex, symbolic horror figures can transcend their original narrative intent and be reappropriated by communities, revealing deeper universal themes of otherness and resilience. The Babadook, as a symbol of repressed, misunderstood, and ultimately integrated otherness, resonated with the LGBTQ+ community's own experiences of marginalization, suppression, and eventual acceptance and celebration of identity. The monster's journey from terrifying entity to a figure of solidarity highlights the film's rich symbolic depth and its ability to speak to diverse human experiences beyond its primary themes. This broader cultural adoption further solidified the film's status as a cult classic. The film's nuanced ending is a critical component of its lasting impact and influence. Unlike traditional horror narratives that typically conclude with the monster's complete destruction, The Babadook offers a departure which some initially found confusing, but ultimately conclusive for its titular terror. After her final confrontation, Amelia locks the Babadook in the basement, forced to allow him residence within their home. She brings him earthworms, tending to his basic needs, symbolizing that overcoming inner demons means finding ways to endure them, rather than extinguishing them once and for all. This signifies that grief is a persistent presence. But by confronting the pain incrementally and with support, its power can be diminished. Jennifer Kent has affirmed that she has been right not to make a sequel, as the ending is completely right with almost zero legitimate criticisms, offering closure without needless cliffhangers. Kent's belief that darkness is a part of life, it needs to be integrated, underscores this nuanced resolution. This refusal to provide a traditional vanquishing ending for its monster, opting instead for management and integration, is a significant thematic and narrative innovation that directly influenced the elevated horror movement. This choice shifted the genre's focus from external threats to internal psychological landscapes. The non-traditional resolution directly supports the film's core message about living with rather than eradicating mental illness and grief. This thematic depth and narrative courage set a precedent for subsequent elevated horror films that similarly explore complex psychological states through genre tropes. Conclusion: a profound and persistent horror, The Babadook's terrifying nature is inextricably linked to its profound origins as a manifestation of internal, suppressed grief and trauma. Born from Jennifer Kent's personal experiences with loss and deeply embedded in Amelia's psychological state, The Babadook is not merely an external monster, but a visceral embodiment of inner turmoil. Its emergence from a children's pop-up book and its handmade aesthetic make it feel both primal and intimately connected to the protagonist's subconscious, blurring the lines between objective reality and psychological torment. The film's masterful use of psychological horror techniques further amplifies its dread. By largely relying on the unseen, unsettling sound design and a meticulously crafted atmospheric visual palette, the Babadook forces the audience to confront their own fears of mental instability and unresolved pain. This approach makes the Babadook's terror deeply personal and persistently unsettling, resonating long after the credits roll. Ultimately, the Babadook redefined modern horror by proving that true terror can emerge from the depths of the human psyche, shifting the genre's focus from external, tangible threats to internal psychological struggles. Its enduring cult status and profound influence on subsequent films attest to its lasting impact, demonstrating that the most terrifying monsters are often those we carry within ourselves. The film powerfully conveys that these internal demons demand recognition and integration rather than simple defeat. It serves as a potent reminder that confronting our shadow side is essential for experiencing the fullness of life, even if that process is inherently terrifying. The Babadook stands as a testament to the power of horror, not just to scare, but to illuminate the complex and often frightening landscape of the human mind.